Good afternoon. We're going to be talking about Japanese knotweed on the wild and scenic Housatonic River. I'm Tom Zetterstrom from Northwest Connecticut. I've been paddling the Housatonic since I was a Boy Scout some 60 years ago. 3 years ago, we proposed that knotweed should not own the Housatonic River. Indeed, we wish to keep it wild and scenic. Knotweed forms dense thickets that preclude all plants, including native plants, and the ramifications of that are that it precludes native insects. In riparian areas, it becomes a monoculture of a single plant. Doug Talamay has documented the reduction in the biomass of insects at 96% in invaded areas such as that. The impact on the food web that especially is rich in a riparian area affects the avian populations, fish, amphibians, invertebrates, the whole matrix of the food web. Japanese knotweed is recognized as the most aggressive terrestrial invasive. It is the weed that took over the world. It's even North America, though it was only introduced in 1890. It was intentionally planted because of its visual qualities. It's even making an assault on the Connecticut state capitol. In Northwest Connecticut, much of the land is preserved from development, but not from Japanese knotweed. The 42-mile stretch of the river became the subject for a comprehensive survey with iPhones, GPS technology, and 10 paddlers that examined both banks from Canaan, Connecticut to New Milford. We determined that with the help of the mapping department of the Housatonic Valley Association, that we were still within the management range for controlling knotweed on the Housatonic. In certain areas in Canaan and Salisbury, we've already treated over 50% of the knotweed patches. Dropping down to the Cornwall-Sharon corridor, which is where we paddled and discovered the monster knotweed patch of the entire river. It represented two facets of knotweed, both the riparian belt immediately hugging the bank and an upslope patch, which was where it was originally introduced. This was just a few hundred yards upstream from Connecticut's most photographed piece of architecture, the Cornwall Covered Bridge. Our goal was to prevent the Cornwall Covered Bridge from becoming obscured with knotweed, as had the Sheffield Covered Bridge, only 25 miles upstream. Other goals were to preserve the agricultural integrity and the ecosystem dynamics of native plants along the river and prevent this from becoming this, which also exists up in Massachusetts, where knotweed extends to the horizon along the riparian belts. The particular large project was daunting in its scope, and it had been introduced about 20 years ago in contaminated fill. It was so tall and well established that a 12-foot orchard ladder was required to get foliar applications to the top of the canopy of knotweed. Bob Gambino, invasive plant manager from New Milford, led the project, and here is spraying this monoculture of knotweed. So take into account, there is no by spray because there are no other plants. There are no unintended targets. The target is as big as a barn. After 1 year, the knotweed mortality was in the treated areas was about 90%. We had considered tarping, but the topography and the floodplain would have made that unreliable, and other experiments with tarping were challenging. We might have considered a stem injection rather than foliar spray. However, stem injection uses a great deal more herbicide. Though for small stands, it's a very appropriate way to kill a patch of knotweed. Locally, in the regional newspaper called the Lakeville Journal, "Glyphosate is Killing Us All" appeared as a commentary by a former director and general legal counsel of the World Health Organization, Tony Peel. A week later, he recognized his overgeneralization and clarified, we are not talking about the careful, responsible, safe, and effective use of glyphosate to fight invasive plants threatening our native plants. Tony recognized the role of native plants and that our projects were essential to protect them. Robert F. Kennedy of NRDC explained on the Living on Earth National Public Radio Earth Day program, glyphosate alone is less toxic than glyphosate in the formulation of Roundup. Surfactants known as toluamines make glyphosate far more toxic than it alone, perhaps 10,000 times more toxic. We don't use Roundup, but we do use glyphosate. And in the Nature Conservancy Weed Control Handbook, it explains that glyphosate has a property which binds it to soil particles and is therefore not taken up from the soil by other non-target plants. Also, it has a half-life of less than 2 months. Therefore, it degrades biologically in the soil and allows us to proceed with restoration. Here, immediately behind that barn, the following spring after the second session of treatment, we are sowing a conservation mix to establish ground cover. In year 2, it looked like this. Later that summer, it looked like this. So imagine this by comparison to what pre-existed. And you will understand that our project was a success. Looking downstream, that short distance to the covered bridge, you see the riparian belt that was treated on the lower right. There, the following spring, skunk cabbage was already pushing through the fallen thickets of knotweed. On Earth Day of that year, local conservationist and birder Art Jengert sowed conservation mix. That's at the end of April. By June, it looked like this. And by August, it looked like this. So we had reestablished ground cover. Just last month, it looked like this. And on October 2nd, we, and with the help of the Housatonic Valley Association, began a program of native plant restoration and planting along that belt. When you look at the longer timeline of a 20-year established plant, we arrived very late in the game, near the biological full potential of the invasive. Had we arrived 10 years earlier, we would have had a fraction of the effort, therefore much less herbicide, much less restoration work. First occurrence and early recognition are key. Early recognition, early detection, and rapid response are the most effective means of invasive management. We were interested in that region of the Housatonic, both in the corridor of the river and the highway network, because they intersect. Early detection here would take barely an ounce of 2 or 3% solution of glyphosate. Here, maybe 2 ounces. Here, you can see the job was done and resolved. Here, the project is a little larger, but it was treated by the Connecticut DOT. When you look at the proximity of knotweed on the roadside, oftentimes you will see a potential association with ground disturbance or construction, such as the guardrail you see in the photograph. Here we see the introduction of knotweed associated with a drainage basin and paving. There was fill brought in subsequently. Here you see in Cornwall, Connecticut, knotweed that had been introduced long ago and was probably extended along the full range of the road by the use of a mower, dragging fragments from the mower deck down the highway as it proceeded. Mowing serves really only one purpose, which is to preserve line of sight. However, it will not kill the biomass of the plant, 60% of which is underground. Here we see at a ConnDOT facility, contaminated fill with knotweed growing in it. So that gets loaded into a truck and is used on some roadside project. What do you have? You have planted a new patch of knotweed. Here at the Cornwall gravel pit, the town has been distributing from here knotweed around its town roads. Here, the same thing happened in Canaan. Here, the same thing happened in Falls Village. So we had concluded that the primary vector for the distribution of new knotweed patches in our region and probably statewide is contaminated and propagules of knotweed in gravel pits. Here you can see where there was road work for drainage, knotweed growing. It didn't fall out of the sky, it actually came out of a town truck. In North Canaan, we've treated nearly all the roadside knotweed and are basically aiming to have a knotweed-free highway system. In West Cornwall and Cornwall, they have just begun that process this year. With that in mind, we did a knotweed workshop for the town crews of the 7 towns in the Wild and Scenic Housatonic region. Taught them how to do proper, safe, and effective spraying with Bob Gambino as the primary instructor. Had an excellent turnout. Spray to glisten, not to drip. Don't foliar treat in the blossom period. Use herbicide to control line of sight rather than mowing. You have to mow 2 or 3 times a year. When you treat with herbicide, you can transition back to native ground cover. Keep that knotweed correct. Whether you're using a tank on a truck, 25-gallon or 50-gallon, you can treat a lot of patches, or even a backpack sprayer. Here we're trying to get that top of the canopy sprayed with visibility so we are not having a by-spray on non-intended plants. Mowing on the side of a brook can flail fragments into the brook, which will float downstream and then land on a sandy bar. And you can even see knotweed along the bank behind this, where it has established from unintended, shall we say, worst management practices. Here in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, a patch of knotweed is not even being properly managed for line of sight, but as deep as that mower is pushed into the ground, the 60% biomass of the plant will never be affected. The only treatment method here that would be effective would be a foliar herbicide application. Those practices along roadsides are described extremely well in the Penn State University fact sheet, and the Bible of knotweed management, best management practices, is produced by the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture. To review, we evaluated the environment. We counted up the knotweed patches. We know where they are. The Housatonic Valley Association Mapping Department provided the towns with maps. Prevention is best and cheapest when it's early detection and rapid response. Keep all gravel and fill storage area 100% knotweed free. Otherwise, you will be inadvertently producing new knotweed patches through routine public works operations. Avoid propagules in water or wetlands. Flag roadside patches so you can limit their mowing to line of sight. clean mower decks. When it comes to treatment, late July, August, and September, but avoid the blossom period. There will be honeybees on those blossoms. During the first year, with 3% glyphosate, we're getting 70 to 90% kill. Second year, 90 to 99. Third year, spot treatment, a few plants here and there that are half the height. You have to kill the roots. Therefore, you need to monitor for 3 to 5 years. After the first year, you can actually establish ground cover with conservation mix. That holds that patch from becoming exposed to other invasives. So this can become this becomes this, and it couldn't be done without the cooperation of regional partners. Our paddlers, Housatonic Valley Association, Housatonic River Commission, Northwest Council of Governments, Northwest Community Foundation, Falls Village Firehouse, where they hosted the workshop, Public Works Department of all towns, local land trusts cooperate on their property, and two foremost Housatonic River commissioners, Bob Gambino and Christian Allen, who are also invasive plant managers. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.